DC Comics superheroes might be some of the most iconic, but not all heroes at DC have power sets that are winners, and even those that do don't always have powers that make sense. Oh boy. When it comes to Power Girl, her powers are odd in the way that they are restricted, let's say, or at least how they used to be restricted. Specifically, we're talking about her power of invulnerability here. She can't be harmed by anything really, because, well, invulnerable, except sometimes natural materials? So I'm pretty sure that, like her Atlantean heritage, which was also a thing at one point in her origins history, seriously, this happened, you can look it up, this restriction and weakness was also retconned out of existence, but there was a time where if Power Girl got into a fight and someone threw a stick or a stone at her hard enough, it could literally break her bones, as this was her one vulnerability. Very strange. What do you think are some just like weird powers in terms of restrictions that exist? Sometimes there are just things that I'm like, but why? I think it says it all when you belong to a team with the words substitute heroes in the title. Dag Wentham is known as Stone Boy, and he belongs to the team known as the Legion of, yes, substitute heroes. He is an alien from the planet Zwen who can transform into a stone form, becoming super strong and durable. Sounds pretty cool, right? But this also immediately makes him, unable to move. Not super useful in combat if you want to, I don't know, do anything other than just survive, I guess. Let me put it another way. Stone Boy has also not been spotted since the New Earth continuity. I think that tells you just how ridiculous his abilities are. So ridiculous that we can't even seem to find a place for him in the massive universe that is the Prime Earth continuity. And this is even after he finally manages to gain some ability in a possible future to move somewhat while in his stone form post 0 hour. Zatana is one of those characters who can do pretty much anything, but even she has rules that she needs to play by, which make her powers kind of a little weird. Case in point, her powers allow her to cast magical spells, and she can do almost anything with those magical spells. Magic is wild in the sense that, yeah, you can do anything you can really imagine, or anything there's a spell for at least, but at the same time, it's not necessarily something that's easy to do. It has taken, dedication, focus, willpower, years of training, and a natural aptitude for Zatana to get where she is. And even then, she still has to say all of her spells backwards apparently. Although this might seem like a weird restriction on paper, and yes, you're right, it definitely is. With Zatana in Justice League Dark, we'd actually learned that the reason that she has to say her spells backwards is because magic, being naturally wild, had to be tamed in some way by rules on Earth. And so that is just one of the rules that was used to prevent it from becoming too chaotic and disrupting the balance in the world. Funny Man is an odd superhero who historically is actually pretty significant, despite how weird he may seem. He's not just powerful for how much of a goofball he is powerful in a historical context, which I think means he deserves a spot here on this list. Funny Man was a creation of Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster after they left DC and they began what would become an epic and a long time legal dispute over the rights to Superman. It's very interesting. If you haven't looked into it, highly recommend. A very fascinating part of comic book history. And honestly, rightfully so. They felt they weren't being fairly paid their dues, and we figured that out, and now that's also why they're always credited whenever we talk about Superman. Siegel especially was passionate about getting the rights back. After leaving DC, they reconnected with former DC editor Vin Sullivan, who had started his own comic book company, Magazine Enterprises. Jerry and Joe tried to recreate the magic of Superman, but this time by teaming up to make something entirely different and new. Funny Man. Celebrating their love of comic book pranks and humor, Funny Man was comedian Larry Davis, who after a publicity stunt gone wrong, ends up actually catching a real-life criminal and decides to just become a bona fide superhero, cause why not? Using his jokes and his funny pranks to apprehend and stop criminals. A wacky idea that sadly did not end up panning out in the end, as the character only lasted, sadly, 6 issues. Oh no. Funny Man didn't have any powers, but he was miraculously and comically good at stopping villains with his antics, and sometimes also did this by accident. Elasti Woman. I love Rita Far. She is just one of the members of DC's Doom Patrol. In the show Doom Patrol, Rita might struggle to utilize and control her powers, still afraid of them and honestly of her appearance while using them, as well as becoming permanently stuck in her creepy elastic form when she uses it. But in the comics, Elasti Woman has actually learned to master these abilities abilities. Rita gained her powers while she was a Hollywood actress and was working on a set in Africa. She was exposed to volcanic gas, which allowed her to change the size of her body and her limbs at will, also having the ability to stretch her limbs out. John Byrne's interpretation of the character was also able to alter the size of objects as well, just by touching them, and the current Primer's continuity version of her also has shape-shifting abilities. I also feel like DC's Doom Patrol television series just does like an amazing job of capturing what shapeshifting or what stretching powers would be like in real life, and how they would actually be really scary, like the whole horror and body dysmorphia aspects that probably would come with that. So if you also haven't watched Doom Patrol, you should go do it. Crazy Jane is a member of the Doom Patrol as well, and honestly that is just a great team to look at if you want to find some superheroes who are quite powerful but also super weird. Jane is no exception to that rule, of course. She's kind of like Marvel's Legion, who actually appeared only a few years before Jane made her debut over at DC Comics, first appearing in Doom Patrol issue number 19 in the 1987 series created by comic book writing legend Grant Morrison and masterful artist Richard Case. Crazy Jane is Kay Chalice, who within her has at least 64 personalities, each with their own personas and their own power sets. The challenging thing is that Jane often struggles to find balance with the various personalities residing within her and has demonstrated various levels of control over them. Wildcat initially was boxer Ted Grant, who didn't actually have any superpowers, but instead had amazing fighting prowess. However, over time, as sometimes does happen, he would also gain powers via, well, a curse. It doesn't even sound like a curse based on actually what it did for him. It gave him resurrection powers, but with a weird, oddly thematically fitting limit in regards to his number of lives. He only gets 9 because he's a cat. Get it? He only has 9 lives. Probably one of the strangest but also most powerful heroes out there, honestly, is Metamorpho. Metamorpho made his first appearance back in 1965 in The Brave and the Bold issue number 57 and has also been known as the Element Man in the comics. He has a very unique and interesting power set that allows him to transform his body or his body parts into any element. This also gives him a pretty unique look as well. Metamorpho isn't the only hero to exhibit these powers though, and at one point we also had Element Girl. His story ended up being quite dark in the end, very bleak actually. But before Sandman happened, she did assist Metamorpho on some of his adventures. Both Element Man and Element Girl are believed to be agents of the Egyptian sun god Ra, Amun-Ra. He created beings that apparently were known as Metamorphae, and that's apparently what they are. Aquaman is an interesting character. Oftentimes he is considered to be one of the weakest members of the Justice League, and is often, I would say, the butt of many DC Comics fans' jokes. Maybe a little less now that Jason Momoa was Aquaman recently, but still, at the end of the day, that is a thing that did happen, and I would actually say that Aquaman, when you think about it though, is actually pretty nuts when it comes to his power set, at least in the modern day. I feel like the fact that we used to make fun of him so much seems goofy. Although if we go back, I guess, to some of the more old school rules when it comes to his power set, maybe it is easier to see why so many people considered him kind of weak in comparison to his fellow heroes on the Justice League. One restriction that was pretty weird was that because Aquaman was from Atlantis, he actually needed to be dipped in water periodically, or he would literally dry out, making him useless and putting him in great danger if he was away from water too long. He literally became a fish out of water. However, in the water, very powerful. Now just pretty much powerful all the time, I think. Arm Fall Off Boy has to be one of the weirdest ones out there. Unlike another odd hero, Bouncing Boy, who eventually in the Primer's continuity did achieve his dream, Arm Fall Off Boy has never made the cut for the Legion of Superheroes. Sad. And that is saying something, considering that the Legion of Superheroes themselves are a pretty weird superhero team by all definitions. Arm Fall Off Boy has the power to detach his limbs, which he typically then attempts to use to beat his enemies with. And I mean, it is pretty cool that he can like remove his limbs and survive that, but it's also less cool that really all he does from there is like use his arm or his leg as a weapon. Especially as this means now he has like less limbs to actually move around with and use in combat. It's really pretty silly. And so is the onomatopoeia that often is used to describe the sound of his power, which I love. It is plorp. So satisfying, but also very disturbing to read on a page when someone removes their arm. Plorp. That's about it. I'm your host, Amanda McKnight. Until next time, you stay nerdy.